right. Well, welcome everyone. We are, as I mentioned, we're doing the diving reflex lab today. Just to introduce myself, I am a zoology. I was a zoology student for my PhD. I'm an alum of Oregon State University. I also was a professor of biology for 15 years. So I taught everything from intro biology at the freshman level to human anatomy and physiology, and then also upper division classes and topics like neurobiology, animal behavior, endocrinology, as well as vertebrate biology. And I was a big fan of lots of hands-on and cooperative learning styles in the classroom, where students are working in teams to accomplish their lab and everybody has a role. I was also involved in K through 12 STEM outreach activities throughout that, through pretty much throughout my career, everything from, and I say K through 12, really it was pre-K through 12. So I will also introduce you now to my co-presenter today, and also our lab subject for today, and that is John Melville. Do you want to introduce yourself, or do you want me to introduce you?
Go ahead and introduce me. I will be the good student and be quiet.
All right. John was a biology psychology major for his undergrad, and then he also got his PhD in zoology at Oregon State University. Did a postdoc at University of Oregon in a neuroscience, in the neuroscience area. And he was also an associate professor of biology for a number of years, teaching courses like biology and neuroscience. And he is also a big proponent of active learning, especially with an emphasis on things like data collection and inquiry style learning. And we'll talk a little bit about using inquiry styles with this particular lab as well as we kind of progress through the presentation today. So just to remind you, we're Vernier Software and Technology, and we were founded by a teacher. And most of us are, especially in my area of if you call in to chit chat with somebody for support, you're probably talking to a former teacher. So that's why we use for teachers by teachers. For the presentation today, we ask that you put your questions into the Q&A. You'll notice that there's a chat channel and a Q&A channel. Q&A will be a little easier. If you accidentally put them in chat, that's not a problem, but it's a little easier to manage them if they go into the Q&A. And we'll answer those as we go. So please don't hesitate if we're unclear about something, or if you just have a question that pops into mind as we're progressing through the lab today, please feel free to throw those questions into the Q&A. And then Angie, or one of our other colleagues in the presentation, they are monitoring the Q&A, and they will either answer in writing or they'll relay them to us, and we can actually talk about them as a group. And then if time allows, we'll have more time as well for more general discussion or questions at the end of the demo. So we're also going to be using Graphical Analysis Pro. So I wanted to introduce that to you if you're not as familiar with it. If you have it on your own device, you can actually follow along with today's presentation. If you have the free version, we're also providing you with a code that is good until the 22nd of August. And you can try that software out yourself and also with your students. You can also still sign up for a free trial. So there's a 30-day trial available. The code that's for today is a separate one. So you can still do the code from today. And then if you'd like to try it a little longer, then sign up for the free trial. But the code is, if you want to cut and paste it, I believe that Angie will drop it into the chat for you if you'd like to upgrade your own version of Graphical Analysis Pro. And then we're also going to be doing, as we mentioned, the diving reflex lab. We have that available for you in the folder that goes along with today's presentation. So you can find in there a copy of the student instructions written for graphical analysis and GoDirect sensors, and also the set of instructor notes for you that has some tips and tricks for doing this lab yourself. All right, well, to start with some background, if you're not familiar with the diving reflex is actually found in mammals in general, but it's particularly strong in mammals that dive, especially marine mammals. So any mammals that dive and hold their breath you see an extreme version of this reflex that we're going to explore today in humans. Some of the champions of this are the Weddell seals, which have been pretty well studied in Antarctica. That was our opening slide, was a photo of a Weddell seal from our colleague, Robin Gastineau, taken in Antarctica. They can hold their breath for up to almost an hour, and then they dive to around 600 meters. And they're probably the most popular example of the dive reflex that you'll find because they've been pretty well studied. But another example that's actually
Sarah,
yes.
Can I interrupt you really quick? We just had some people who are having a hard time hearing you. I will try to adjust things on my end because you're coming in loud and clear, but I just wanted to mention that to you.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. I can, if we need to, I can try adjusting my microphone a little bit. Hopefully that, I'm going to back up a little bit so I'm more under the mic. The other example that I was going to tell you about were Cuvier's beaked whales, and they were featured, I believe it was about a year or two ago, in the Journal of Experimental Biology, because they set the record for deep water dives. And so far, I believe the record is nearly 3,000 meters. And there was a whale that stayed under for 3 hours and 42 minutes. And so they're not as well studied as things like Weddell seals, but they are one of the really extreme examples of this diving reflex. But humans also have this diving reflex. So we can study it actually in humans, and that's what we're going to do today in this lab exercise. So for our live demonstration, we are going to be using experiment number 6 from the book Human Physiology Experiments, Volume 2. And this particular experiment is going to use 2 sensors. We're going to use the Go Direct respiration belt, but we're using it in kind of an odd way. We're going to be using it really to just track when the subject holds their breath. So we're not really concerned with looking at respiration rate. Obviously, the rate when someone is holding their breath is going to be 0. But we want it basically to provide us a marker in the data for when the event occurs. And then we also will be using the Go Direct EKG, but we're going to use the heart rate channel. So this, for those of you who are familiar with these 2 sensors, we're actually going to use the non-default channels for these 2 sensors. Actually, that's not true. We're going to use the force channel for the respiration belt. We're just not looking at rate. And then we're going to use the heart rate channel on EKG instead of looking at an EKG readout. All right. So I'm going to switch the view to John because we're actually going to talk about how to place the electrodes on our subject. So there's John Melville. He's getting ready for this lab. So go ahead and place your electrodes. We'll do this. Normally we connect the sensors and the software first, but we want to make sure that we demonstrate some of the extra things that you need for this lab.
Yeah, the electrodes can be placed like on the forearm here and here. These are the electrodes that come with the Go Direct EKG. But I also have these red dot 3M electrodes, which work really nice. And I have placed them on my biceps. So you can see one here, one here, one here. And then with the Go Direct EKG, it's got a really nice picture that tells you where the leads go. It's red is left, green is right. Red, left, green, right. And then I'm going to put the reference here on my back of my bicep. Oh, I'll turn it on too. I'm going to turn the sensor on.
Yeah, we'll connect it to software in just a moment. So you'll notice in front of John that he also has a pan of ice water. And all you really need is a shallow pan with enough ice water to cover someone's nose and mouth at the very least. And the reason for that is that this reflex is stimulated when the skin of the nostrils contacts ice water. And so the wetting and the chilling of the cold receptors in that skin is what's going to trigger this reflex. So we have a rather large bowl of water. But if you don't need something really elaborate or really deep, you don't want to plunge somebody's whole head in, or at least you don't need to. You really just need mainly their nose and kind of the front of their face in the water. And then we always recommend have a clean towel nearby for your subject, because they're going to obviously be cold and wet when the dive is finished. All right, so again, if you'd like to follow along, you can do this through Graphical Analysis Pro. That upgrade code is here again. That's the same upgrade code as before. So if you'd like to launch Graphical Analysis now, if you've already got Pro, then you don't need to use the upgrade code. But if you have the free version, then you just add that upgrade code. And then when you launch, you're going to be selecting data sharing. And I'm going to give you a 6-digit session code if you'd like to stream our live data during the presentation. So I'm going to,
I was going to say, Sarah, there's a quick question that I think would be a good time while Melville's getting set up.
Absolutely.
Erin would like to know, is there anything else that can be used in place of the ice bath? Could it be a bag of ice?
Yes, actually you can. We've actually demoed it. We tried it out this week with ice packs. We knew that ice packs should work, and it's actually listed in one of the extensions, and we can actually demo today using something like just a frozen ice pack like you would put into a cooler. And that you can also use just loose ice if you prefer. The big thing is you just want to make sure that the placement is very much like on the nose or under the nose, kind of on that skin of the nostrils for the subject. So that's a great question. And thank you for asking, because that was something that we were going to talk about a little bit later today anyway. Do we have any others?
So somebody is wondering where they enter the code. So if you can go over where they.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm going to launch for Vernier Graphical Analysis in just a second here. Let's get that up on the screen. All right. So if you are launching it, I'm going to get rid of this little window for the moment. To upgrade your version, if you've already launched, you can put that into the About menu. And let's see, I'm not being prompted for it, but you should be prompted in your copy. Oh, let's see, license key. So you can just enter it right in this box here to upgrade your license key. And you can also use this one if you prefer, the Catch GA22, or you can use the one that I gave you earlier. But you'll put it in there and you'll submit, and that will activate your copy. So that one is good actually until the one here is a better code than the one that I gave you, because this one actually lasts until the end of September. And then you'll upgrade. All right. And then I'm gonna relaunch a new experiment because I wanted to take you through the setup process. So what we're going to select for this, on my end, I'm going to select sensor data collection. And then we're going, if you would turn on your sensors, John. Oh, they're on. Okay. All right. They didn't pop up immediately. All right. So we're on the respiration belt. I'm going to actually turn off our rate and just use our force channel. And then I'm also going to connect the GoDirect EKG. And on that, I'm also going to select sensor channels. I'm going to turn off EKG and turn on just heart rate. And when we do that, it auto formats our graphs so that we have a force graph on the top and we have our heart rate graph on the bottom. But we do also need to change our time mode for this experiment because it's using the default duration for the EKG sensor in this case and the sampling rate. So we're going to alter our time. We're going to change it to 10 samples per second since we're not recording an EKG. And then we also want to change our duration. Rather than 3 seconds, we'd like it to be 120. And then we're ready to collect some data. Now, if you'd like to follow along at home, when you launch GA, you might remember that window where I picked sensor data collection. On your end, you'll pick data sharing when you launch that new experiment. And then I'm going to, on my end, I'm going to start a data sharing session. So this is what the teacher view would be in starting a data sharing session. From the student end, you're going to launch your file, pick data sharing, and then you're going to enter the 6-digit code. And I can expand that to make it easier for everybody to read. So this is going to set you up so that you're going to live stream all of the data that John and I collect in this session today. And I will note that the data sharing session codes are launched with each new session, each new experiment. So it would not be, if we were to stop this and start a new session, it's going to generate a new 6-digit code. So just be aware of that with your students, is that every time you begin a new data share session, it's going to assign a new code to it. All right, hopefully that's enough time for everybody to connect who was interested. And then, all right, we are sharing data. All right, so now we're going to do our first run. We're going to do 3 different runs with John to begin with. And the first one is going to be, we want to look at his heart rate before and during a normal breath hold. So nothing in the ice water, just holding his breath. We're then going to do a simulated dive in the cold water where he'll put his face into the ice water, and then we'll record again. And then the third one will be a normal breath hold, but we're going to put a limb into ice water. And we're actually, in this case, the lab is written to use the foot. In this case, we're going to actually use John's arm, and we'll talk about why in a little while. But there's a little bit of variation that you can do on this lab, certainly if you need to on your end, and it will work just fine. All right, so we're going to go ahead and collect a run of data. I'm going to put John on camera. And we're going to start again with just the normal breath hold. So what we want is about 40 seconds of normal breathing, just to get a baseline heart rate. And at 40 seconds, we're going to ask John to take a deep breath and hold it, but we're not quite there yet. I'm going to scale so we can see these data coming in live. All right, John, take a nice deep breath and hold it. So it's good to have the subject hold their breath for as long as they can, or up to about 60 seconds, whichever comes sooner. It's certainly okay if they let their breath out early. If they can manage to hold it for 60, that's great, but they don't need to hold it any longer. All right, so John has let his breath out. I'm going to give a little bit of time just to collect a few more data points. See some recovery breaths there as he breathes a larger volume for a little while. All right, and then we can stop data early. We don't need to necessarily go the full 120 seconds. All right, so for our analysis, what we'd like to do is look at the 10 seconds of data before the subject held their breath. So we're going to highlight, and it doesn't have to be precisely 10 seconds, but we're going to get roughly 10 seconds. And down here under graph options on our heart rate graph, we're going to click to bring up our menu. We're going to just look at view statistics, because what we want to see is just the average. So the mean, his heart rate was at 66.6 beats per minute before the breath hold. And then we want to look at the last 10 seconds during the breath hold. So you can see now why the respiration channel showing the force is very handy to have in this case, because it gives us basically kind of a marker of where he stopped holding his breath. So view statistics again. Notice that his heart rate went up by about 10 points. His mean for this during the breath hold, the latter part of the breath hold, was 76 point, round that up to 7 beats beats per minute. So you can see that his heart rate during the latter part of the breath hold got faster. And again, this is our control here as the normal breath hold. All right, Angie, do we have any questions that we need to address before we move on to the next treatment?
There was one that came in that I just wanted to verify the answer with you. So Mary Beth has the original LabQuest with the blue bumpers, and it sounds like the EKG BTA version. If she interfaced with the GA Pro on her computer, would that combo work the same as the GoDirect sensors that you're using?
So the EKG, the original EKG, does it have a heart rate channel?
No, but
you could probably, instead of EKG, you could use the heart rate, like the heart rate sensor, for instance, either the heart rate monitor or the Go Wireless. Well, the Go Wireless wouldn't work with the original LabQuest, but the heart rate monitor would work because you really just need the heart rate. You could, if you didn't have anything but EKG, you could certainly record an EKG trace, and then you just have to calculate heart rate from it. So the advantage of having the GoDirect sensor is that the GoDirect sensor has a lot of extra channels built in for you, and so it's a little bit easier to get that heart rate reading.
yeah, if they just email biology@vernier.com, we could probably set them up with the stuff they need if they have the old sensors.
Yeah, you're welcome to contact us, and we can send you any materials that you need to adjust that lab to make it work with your equipment. All right, that was a great question. All right, so now what we're going to do is the simulated dive. So John is we're going to repeat what we did, but the difference will be, of course, that he's holding his breath with his face in the ice water. So we'll go ahead and start data collection again. And again, John, just breathe comfortably. As comfortable as you can. We'll tell him when it's time to get ready to take a breath and put his face in the water. All right, take a nice deep breath, hold it, put your face in the water. All right, I think you can see on the graph already, you can see what a different pattern it is with his heart rate. There's an initial rise, but then it really plunges. So again, we can go ahead and stop that a little early. And let's run our analysis now. So we'll do those.
Oh, good.
What are you seeing? It's good.
It's
Oh, it looks great.
looks
Yeah.
good. Looks good.
All right. So his heart rate was a little high going into this, probably from the breath hold earlier. His mean was 79.227. And you can certainly allow, if your subjects feel like they have if their heart rate's elevated, they could certainly, oh, we lost our, that was odd. We just lost our Bluetooth. We'll go back to our recorded data there. I'm not sure what happened there. Our sensor lost connection. We might have too much in between us and the.
The data's still there though, so we can.
Yeah, the data are still there. So we can just start a new session when it's time. All right, so he was at 70, we'll call it, I think it was 77 point something there before. And now for the end of it, we'll just try to grab our last 10 seconds before he let his breath out. And view statistics, and you can see his heart rate. Now it was still plunging when he let his breath out, but you can see that over 10 seconds, his average during the dive was 52.6. So nice difference there. Very, very different response when the face is plunged into ice water. All right, and we'll need to reconnect our respiration belt here, but we'll do that on the fly. Go ahead and turn that sensor back on if you would.
Oh, it looks like, where's the EKG sensor?
I'm still getting a live reading for heart rate, so it was the respiration belt, I think.
Okay, let me cycle it. I'll turn it on.
If we have to, we can relaunch too.
There you go.
There we go. It came back. Okay. Came back in our menu. All right, and it was already formatted correctly for our force channel. All right, so for our final treatment, we're going to do sort of essentially like a positive control. What we want to do is expose John to cold, but not on his face. And so this is where the normal protocol, or the most common protocol, is to plunge the foot into ice water. Because for most people, this is a kind of an unpleasant response, or an unpleasant experience of sticking your foot into a bowl of ice water. In the case, what we figured out with John was that when we've done this in the past, he doesn't respond very well, or doesn't respond much to having his foot in ice water. We made this discovery with a different lab called biofeedback. And we figured out that the difference is probably because he's a surfer and he spends a lot of time in the Pacific Ocean with his hands and his feet very, very cold. So we figured it would be easier today also to just do this with a bowl of water on the table and to put his arm in the water. Because what we want to do is provoke a cold response, but not the same cold response as the dive reflex. So we're gonna do this one more time, but with John he's gonna hold his breath and he's gonna put his arm into the ice water as we do this. So we will start one more run of data collection before we take a little break, and we'll talk a little bit more about the lab setup. All right, so one last time, we're gonna get normal breaths. And earlier today, when he was putting on those electrodes, you note he put them kind of high up on his arms, and that's to make sure that they're not plunged into the ice water. We don't want the EKG tabs to be submerged, or the wires. So placing them high up on either high on the forearms and putting the hand in ice water, or high up on the biceps, somewhere on the biceps on the upper arm, anywhere is really fine, as long as they're up and out of the way of getting the sensor wet. All right, and we seem to have, it's hard to tell if we froze on our data collection here. Looks like we froze. So we're gonna start, we'll start over. I may need to launch a new GA session.
Yeah, we do that. Just launch a new GA session.
Oops. All right, we'll just exit that. I'm not going to save our previous data. We'll start a new session here. And we'll just connect really quickly. All right, so we turned on our channels. We need to quickly set our parameters again. All right, sorry for the interruption, folks. We can do one more data sharing session if you want to, if anybody was following along. So you'll actually get to see now the difference here when we started a new session, and note that it generated a new code. So if you wanted to save that data on your computer from earlier, you can just name that file and then start a new session. You should get a prompt on your end as the student that the session has changed, and you can join the new one with the new code. So there's our code. And first, I just realized that our window cuts off that last character. So it's FMY9UN. And if Angie would be willing to drop that into the chat, that might be easier. All right. So now we'll move on with that last treatment. Again, we're going to do that final treatment from the lab itself, the lab protocol, which is the normal breath hold. And in this case, we're going to put John's arm into the ice water. So when you're having students do this, it's always good to have the subject unable to see their own data. And that way they don't accidentally influence something without intending to. Okay, John, take a deep breath. Hold it. All right, his arm is in the ice water. One of the nice things is if you are having students work in groups, it's great to have someone in charge of prompting the subject. And that, especially because most of the time we do labs in lab groups, and it's nice to have everybody involved actively. So when I was teaching, I used to have a student assigned to basically their job was to run the computer and monitor data collection, and then have another person monitoring the lab instructions and prompting the subject, just to make sure everybody in the lab has a role, so that they are actively involved. All right, good job. All right, we'll let him take a few recovery breaths, just because it's a great teachable moment there to show students that the depth of the breaths changes after somebody's held their breath for a while. Subject takes much larger breaths until they recover. And then we can also stop data collection at this point. All right, so let's do I'll zoom in. So it's, see, that was, yeah. So one of the things we'll talk a little bit about what's happening when that subject is exposed to cold. That, do our statistics. All right, so, oh, wrong, wrong graph here, as I'm not paying attention. All right. Use statistics. All right, so his heart rate was 69 we'll round that to 7, so 69.7 beats per minute before the arm went into the ice water. And for the last 10 seconds of the arm in ice water, before releasing the breath hold. His heart rate definitely went up. And notice that it even went up higher because it went up to 89, an average of 89. And even that's even higher than it was if you were to calculate this into a percentage difference. That's a bigger difference than the normal control without the exposure to ice water. And that's because ice water tends to prompt a noxious, basically it's responding to it as if it's a noxious stimulus. So we're basically provoking a pain response without really subjecting him to true pain. We are having his body react as if he is experiencing something incredibly unpleasant and painful. Even though it's not a true pain response, it's basically it manifests the same way physiologically. So you can see that his heart rate really shot up during that breath hold, exacerbated not just by the holding of the breath, but also by the exposure to cold water that's not on his face, for instance.
Sarah,
yes.
I think that we had a question that goes right along with what you were just talking about. Is there a particular temp for the water that works best? They've done this with students and found that very cold water makes their heart rates rise and they can't hold their breath long enough to see the effect.
Oh, interesting. Generally, so typically really icy water is ideal. You will still get a response with just cold, or you should at least see some response with cold, but it's the water does have to be pretty chilly to get a really good measurable response in humans, at least what I've found with doing this lab with my classes. You can, if you want to sort of explore inquiry ideas with this lab, you can try other methods. And you can also have students test, for instance, room temperature water, in which case they probably won't get as extreme of a response. It may feel slightly cold, but it's maybe not cold enough to actually trigger the true dive reflex. You can also try it with warm water. And when we've played around with that prep, we find that the warm water just does not trigger the same response as cold water. So you usually see this in a pronounced response in cold water swimmers and cold water divers over other types of, like for those that dive in warmer water, they don't have this extreme response of the heart rate dropping. So the temperature of the water, you really do want it icy to get the best response. And actually, while we're at it, that's a great time to transition into using an ice pack instead. So John has an ice pack, and we can do a trial just to show that if you don't want to mess with bowls of water in your lab, because that's always a risk. We always caution instructors that if you think your students may tip things over, or if you have outlets, for instance, positioned in the floor, which was the case in my old teaching lab, we had outlets under the lab benches, but we wanted to be very, very careful with any water on the floor. You can do this actually with an ice pack. So we'll do one more trial here where John uses the ice pack on his nose instead of plunging his face into water. So we'll go ahead and start data collection. Just get him breathing. I do think that it would be a kind of a fun inquiry-based exercise if students explored how cold the water needs to be to trigger the actual dive reflex versus just the breath hold response. All right, so John, take a nice deep breath and hold it and stick your face on the ice pack. All right. Good job. And you can see just from the data that we're recording as we are looking at it, before we've even analyzed it, you can see that he was definitely on one of those downward runs of heart rate declining, probably not as extreme as the actual ice water, but definitely going in the expected direction for cold water on the face. So we can stop and do our quick analysis here. For the breath hold, we were at a mean of 65.483, so we'll say 65.5. And then towards the end of his breath hold there, right before he let up, we were at 57.467. So you can see it doesn't take long to record data for this lab. The runs themselves are short. So it does give you some time to have your students really explore different options for how they want to do this experiment. All right. All right, so we kind of transitioned actually to our inquiry ideas already. So trying an ice pack. We also tried this yesterday with John for the breath hold with the ice pack stimulus on his arm. And that worked really well for our one of our controls where we wanted to expose him to cold, but not on his face. That worked really nicely. It had a very similar effect to him putting his arm into ice water. So again, it's a less messy way to do the lab, certainly, to use ice pack or to even just use some pieces of ice. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, you can certainly have your students try a comparison with room temperature water or even with warm water to see what the response looks like. They shouldn't get, certainly they shouldn't get a dive reflex with warmer water. Room temperature kind of depends on what your room temperature actually is and how your students respond to it, but it should not be as extreme of a response as certainly as using ice water. Any other questions, Angie?
There was one that came in that I sort of answered, but others might be interested. Marissa wanted to know, can she use the same sensors that you're using, the Go Direct, with the LabQuest 3?
Absolutely. Yes, you can. You can certainly adapt these instructions to LabQuest 3. This lab should work just fine on LabQuest 3. The lab book in question, we have it written specifically for Go Direct sensors and Graphical Analysis Pro, or really just graphical analysis in general. But you should be able to do the exact same steps using a LabQuest 3. It may just look, the interface will look a little bit different, but it should work just fine. All right, any others?
Not at this moment.
All right. All right, well, just to remind you, if you have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A. We also, if you have any need to get in touch with us, please do so. You can do so through our website, www.vernier.com. You can also email support. You can email support@vernier.com. Or you can also chat with us when you're on our website. You should have a chat window pop up during our normal business hours. And that you can certainly put your questions into chat on the website. You can also directly email the biology team. There are only 3 of us, so it's going to go to either John, myself, or our colleague, Colleen. And that's the email for that is biology@vernier.com. So you can reach us. And that's a really nice direct way to get a message right to one of us. And you can even use physiology@vernier.com as well. That'll also go to the same group of people. But don't forget that we are available to chat with you either on the phone or over the web. And we are more than happy to help with options for this lab or any other labs that you might be doing. Looks like we might have another question in the Q&A.
So I was just answering it. It was a question about, is the webinar being recorded? And yes, it is. And it will be up on our website in a few days. It takes us usually a day or two to do the edits. And then everyone will also get a follow-up email with links to the recording, the shared resources folder that I had put in chat earlier, and a certificate of attendance.
All right. And don't forget, you can certainly try this lab. If you don't have the EKG, you can do this. You should be able to do this with a heart rate sensor, either the exercise heart rate or the handheld unit. The one thing with handheld unit is just make sure your students have their arms kind of away from the bowl of water if they're holding something in their hands. Also remember that with the exercise heart rate is on a chest strap. That chest strap does need to be against the skin. So that sensor needs to be worn directly on the skin if you're using the heart rate sensor. But you should be able to do the same basic lab protocol using those other heart rate ways to monitor heart rate. The lab is just written in the book for using the EKG and using the heart rate channel. But any of those methods should work, any of those options. And if you don't have the, I was just thinking, if you don't have the respiration belt, you could just note, if you're very tight on your timing, students could note in the data where the events occur, and they just need to keep track of exactly what their timing is and be pretty precise. But they could, if they had to, run this without the respiration belt. We're really using the respiration belt in this lab as a way to show what's happening during the breath hold, just as a marker really in the data file. All right, any other questions? Angie, shall I show everybody where to find the recorded webinars on the web?
Sure, that would be great.
All right, so I'm just going to navigate to our website. All right, so when you're on our website, if you go to, for the educator training tab, if you hover over that, it's going to bring up some buttons. So go ahead and choose videos. And under those videos, you're going to see the first things that pop up chronologically are our most recent set of webinars. So this one will eventually also populate in that list later in the week. And so you can see all of the recent webinars that we've been doing. They kind of go in reverse chronological order. So if you're looking for a recent one, you can see that we've got some on coding and mathematical models, pH sensor, care and feeding. Also one that we did earlier this summer on investigating protein content of animal milk and plant-based milk, spectrometry. We've got lots of different options here for our videos. Or you can always email us and we can send you the link to get there directly. So, whatever you prefer. All right, well, I guess we can conclude for today. Thank you all for attending and joining us today as we did this lab. If you have any feedback for us, if you'd like to see other topics, let us know. Because that's always, we always enjoy demoing labs that people want to see. So if there's anything in particular that you are really hoping, we may already have it recorded, but if not, maybe that becomes a future webinar topic. So thank you for joining us, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.